Hello, and welcome to Get Recc'd. I am your host, Don Falgout.
And I am your other host, Stephen Falgout. Get Recc'd is our occasional podcast where every time I recommend something to Don, they recommend something to me, and then in the following episode, we talk about it.
Yes, and currently we are in the middle of our epic, amazing, awesome Re-Recc trilogy, which is a series where we go back and recommend things that are, at the very least, very, very, very similar to something else we've recommended before. Usually it's a sequel or another work by the same artist or something of that sort. But it's can be a little bit vague. And today we are coming back with amazing recommendations based off of exactly that. I don't want to give them away yet until we start talking about them because it's a spoiler, But
And you're a little low, and I'm a little loud before we jump in here.
is that really the case? Well, you know what? Okay, I'm gonna boost my volume. All right, here. Wow, yeah, I thought that might be the case. All right, chat, help out with the mix thing, please, if you can. If that still sounds to be the case, I'm trying, but for some reason, Steven is just booming loud today because this is his episode. So this is gonna be his best episode ever, and the streaming software just really wants to make sure that you can hear him.
Well, as you get older, actually, your voice box naturally gets louder. So I'm just climbing every day.
Wow, nice. Well, that means that we're going to get a better Get Recc'd performance out of Steven every day.
Well, I don't know if it'll be better. Because at some point, the decibels will be so high when I even say a word that you won't even be able to listen to the podcast anymore.
That's true. Well, it might not be better, but it will be louder. So if you're looking
for
that's
true. Our Screamo podcast.
It's going to be so rad. Yeah. I mean, it'll be great. But anyway, I think we could get into it. We could move into what I recommended to you last time. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's do it.
Sweet. So last time I recommended to Steven the film A Hard Day's Night. This is a Beatles film. Previously, I'd recommended the film Yellow Submarine, which is the Beatles film in concept, though the actual Beatles are only in it for like 10 minutes. But still, it's considered part of their film canon, and as is this. This was the first film that they did, and it is continuing our tradition of talking about the Beatles as much as we can without ever actually covering one of their albums, which will be a long-standing tradition, and we will never talk about a Beatles album ever, but we will find as many possible chances to talk about the Beatles regardless. It's going to be great. So anyway, I'll pass it over to Steven to see what he thought of this film.
In fact, the closest we will ever get is we'll talk about Beatles cover bands, but we'll never talk about the Beatles.
Awesome stuff.
In fact, stay tuned for documentaries centered around Beatles, the Bugs. But again, not the band, ever. But speaking of the band in this movie, I was surprised because typically what I do is before we record, I'll just do a little quick research after having experienced whatever it is. I don't look at it beforehand. I go in, I guess, as blind as possible unless I've already seen it or whatever. But I was shocked to find that Time magazine has listed this as one of the 100 greatest films of all time, because I did not understand this thing at all. I thought this was like a nothing movie. Now, there were certainly aspects that I enjoyed, but for the most part, I could not see or even ascertain how this could be influential to anything. I did not understand its point or concept. I thought that for the most part, it was just a quasi music video at times, and at other times was just nonsense. I did not enjoy this experience at all. It's not the worst thing we've ever seen on Get Recc'd. I would not put it that badly because for the most part, it was just kind of like an hour and 40 minutes of sort of like nothing. And at best, I was like jamming out to Beatles tunes, which again, we will not talk about those.
Well, we could talk about the film sequences that the songs are in, just
Yeah,
not
the
the songs
original
themselves.
film songs,
Yeah.
such as Hard Day's Night. And like I don't know. I know that like, you know, mainly this is a comedic film, but I didn't laugh or really find any of the situations very funny at all. Sometimes, or most of the time, I found them just kind of annoying. Like when Lennon is like hanging out in a bathtub and pretending to like fight Nazis or something, while George shaves a dude's face, but in the mirror. And like that was the whole movie for me. Like that experience is this film to where it's like nothing.
Interesting. Well, I think the movie kind of is in a lot of ways a nothing movie. I mean, it's basically just, do you like the Beatles? Do you like watching the Beatles talk and like dick around? And if you do, then this is great. But if you don't, then this is not great because there's nothing else. And you would think that it being a musical that, there'd be some kind of bigger plot. Like typically in a musical, you expect the songs to like advance a plot or something, but that also isn't really the case. It's more like the plot of the film is that they're like gearing up for like a television performance and a show, but every time they start singing a song, it's just in the middle. It's just like out of nowhere. They just kind of sing a song, and it's like a lot of the times the sequences that they're singing the songs to, they're not even like, there's just no reason for them to be doing it. Aside from when they actually get to the TV station and they sing songs on the TV station, which is like, okay, they would do that. But it is like literally like, it's just like basically like an hour, 40 minutes of the Beatles dicking around and being very British. And that's the movie. But I love it. I think that it is a really, 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 really funny and sharp movie. But it's also kind of quiet about it. Like, it's not really like an American comedy or even, I guess, other British comedy stuff. I don't know. It isn't like, none of the joke sequences are really that like funny when you think about them. I mean, there is like the bathtub. He's like playing around in a bathtub, and it's funny because he's in a bathtub. But, like, that's kind of what you get. Like that's the level of jokes that you're on here. They're not really these like clever setups or anything. It's kind of just funny because they make it funny because they're so personable, and their interactions are so charming and funny. Like when I think about like an actual setup for like a joke in this movie, there's like, I don't know, there's the thing with the magician, like where the magician like kills a bird, but like even that, it is exactly what it is supposed to be, which is that it shows you the Beatles dicking around for a long time. And of course, when the movie came out, a lot of people would have actually wanted to see that because they were not just popular for the music back then. Not at the time that this movie came out. They were like, huge celebrities, and people wanted to watch them on a movie just and in interviews and wherever they could. And like, that's kind of what it is. So yeah, like compared to Yellow Submarine even, it's like, it's night and day because, I mean, that movie's weird and it does a lot of weird things, but at least it has kind of a plot. Like there's something that's happening. But, even in that movie, they do a lot of the dialogue is kind of similar to this movie where they just dick around and say stupid, silly stuff. It's just that there's so much more there for you if you're not as into that. This movie is nothing. Like, if you're going to be bored by that, this movie is literally nothing. Like, it has music, but you can hear these songs elsewhere. There's nothing special, really, about the song sequences here. The songs themselves, however, I will not comment on. Because I can't, according to our new rule.
But just like, I'm reading this, And as I mentioned, Time listed this as one of the 100 greatest films of all time, which is just shocking to me. But like, for instance, Roger Ebert is quoted here as saying, "This is one of the great life-affirming landmarks of film." And I'm like, what? I don't understand that take at all. I just don't get it. I mean, the movie is fun. Like, I shouldn't be so hyperbolic that to suggest that I didn't enjoy watching this or that it was inherently bad. Like, we've watched bad films. I've seen bad films. This is not a bad film. I just think it's a nothing film. Like, at best, it's just kind of charming to watch them, but I don't think it's charming to watch them in the same sense that, even though they didn't necessarily directly appear, in the same sense that Yellow Submarine was charming and charismatic and emblematic of the time, whereas this is like just four dudes and a grandpa kind of like doing nothing, and then they sing songs sometimes. And there's a lot of shots of girls screaming and crying. And also they have to like dodge fans. So it's like, I get the concept. It's this kind of satire or like look into a day in the life of the Beatles. But that like actually is a day in the life of the Beatles. It's just they're playing themselves up more to be characters. But that isn't inherently funny to me or really honestly that entertaining to watch. Like, it was nothing in the sense that I didn't necessarily like not enjoy the an hour 40 something runtime of this, but I also didn't enjoy it or could ever possibly see this being a landmark in filmography, in cinematography.
I can't speak to that because I don't know what the film critics are referring to necessarily, although there are like good, really great sequences in the movie. I mean, what people think about when they think about this movie a lot of the time is the opening where they're like running away from fans and stuff, which is a really well directed sequence. It's kind of like it's kind of cartoonish. They do like a newspaper gag and stuff. It's very silly. But the shot the shot design and a lot of the shots there are like really, really iconic and really good. But it's also like 5 minutes of the movie. And so I guess I shouldn't say the musical sequences are all like there's like all nothing really going on there. That's not true because the one for A Hard Day's Night absolutely is like really, really good. But that's kind of it. And I don't know. Yeah, I can't speak to that. All I can say is the movie's really, really funny to me, and it's really, really charming, and it's very personable, and like, it's kind of what I would want out of an old rock and roll film, like, because there's like Elvis did a lot of movies, and a lot of these people did a lot of movies, but it just feels like this movie gives you what you actually want to see, and nothing else. Like this there is no like silly storyline or ridiculous storyline, or the Beatles aren't playing characters. I mean, well, I guess they kind of are. They're playing up their own characters, but still, they're just themselves. Like, you watch the movie to see the Beatles, and that's what you see. And it's like, they're really, really funny. And so it's like, I mean, and I guess there are like joke setups. It's just like, I guess the only point I was trying to make is that it's like, it's more, it doesn't feel like there are, because all the jokes essentially amount to characters playing off each other in conversation, and then like maybe like a joke about Paul's grandfather, which the stuff with Paul's grandfather is hilarious.
It's very clean.
He is very clean. Look, I think this movie is hilarious. I think that the dialogue of this movie is amazing, and maybe that I would be curious to see. I don't know what Time magazine does when they put a movie into their top 100. Like, I'm gonna guess there's probably like a small write-up of.
Yeah, they say it's one of the smoothest, freshest, funniest films ever made for purposes of exploitation.
That's pretty valid.
So,
That's pretty valid. I agree with that. I mean, I don't know about one of the most, because I haven't seen enough movies that fit that descriptor anyway, but everything, that doesn't seem like they're overstating anything there. Apparently YouTube's buffering us, so thanks for that. Also,
we're being censored?
Yeah, we're being censored.
The Beatles are after us, finally?
Chat, are we dead, or do you hear us? Hopefully chat hears us. Anyway, it's all right. I forgot to record this, which, fuck. That's all right. It's great. Anyway, that's not that was me talking about the film A Hard Day's Night. You just didn't get it. It was very esoteric. But yeah, like, I don't know if that's their criteria for it, then I actually totally understand that, because I do think the movie's incredibly funny, and I also do think that it's super, super witty, and I like that it's no more than that.
And I guess that I don't. Is pretty much the long and short of it. I just want to put this out there because it's not very often that I feel like we have contrarian opinions on this show. We might differ on the score, but generally I feel like our opinions are pretty well aligned. But on this one, I just don't get it. I just really don't get it.
Well, there you go. I don't really have anything else to say about the movie.
Yeah, the movie is nothing, so I have nothing else to say either.
Yeah. All right, well, go ahead and wrap it up then. You start.
I did like the part where he named his haircut like George or some random person's name. That I did actually think was kind of funny. That's about it, though. So the movie gets a 5. It's right in the middle. Completely mediocre. I don't think I would watch it again. And I won't talk about the nature or my liking of the Beatles because we can never talk about that.
Yes, we can. We just can't talk about their albums.
Oh, well, the Beatles are great. Who knows if their albums are good or not, though?
Yeah.
We'll never know.
Yeah.
No, I don't recommend this movie.
Yeah, I definitely differ a lot. I like this movie more than Yellow Submarine. I've seen this movie multiple times. More than that one, even. Well, no, not in my entire life, but since I got into the Beatles. I think it's fantastic. I think if you like the Beatles enough where you would want to see a movie of them dicking around, then you're going to really, 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 really like this movie, because that is all this is. And it's really good at being that. But if you don't care about that or wouldn't want to see that, then there really is nothing for you, because there is no interesting story. There's great songs, which you can hear probably, maybe, on an album of the same name. Maybe. I'm not sure about that one, but you could...
Yeah, on the film's original soundtrack.
Yeah. That's true.
I'm seeing some discussion in our chat, by the way. Some people in our chat are suggesting that this film is not nothing because it stars the Bugs, Beatles, and that's true. This is actually the prequel to Bug's Life and Ants with a Z.
Wow.
So you heard it here first, everyone.
Well, anyway, I would give this movie probably an 8 or a 9. I don't know how high I would go, but I really, 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 really like it. I think my main issue with the movie is that the musical numbers kind of just break the pace. Even though they're great songs, they break the pace. And unlike Yellow Submarine, the song sequences themselves are definitely not the standout here. They are just there. So that's a pretty big issue, though it's not something that like breaks up the movie too much. And I guess it's nice to at least have something that breaks up the movie, because it is so dialogue heavy otherwise. But yeah. You pick the score, chat. And with that, we move on to what you recommended to me, Stephen, if you would like to explain it and what it is related to that you've previously recommended.
Yeah, before we do that, though, I just want to call out Angela in the chat suggested we do a what happened between Sergeant Pepper's into Let It Be. But that gave me an idea. I think it'd be kind of interesting to do like a what happened between early Beatles and late Beatles. Although I will give you a spoiler, what happened was drugs.
It would be interesting, except...
But it would be interesting, except we can never talk about it.
We can't do it, so yeah, too bad. Anyway.
So, that's it. So with that, we'll move on to what I recommended to you. And I recommended Awaken, My Love.
It is not appearing on... Okay. Well, whatever. Anyway, go ahead, sorry.
It was the 2016 release from stage name Childish Gambino, Donald Glover. And it took a different, or it went in a different direction than most of other Childish Gambino albums. Is that in that it was more soul, funk, R&B than hip hop or rap. And really, to this point, Gambino was known mainly for, I don't know, would you call it like nerd rap? Honestly. um, But anyway, this was a little different than that. So with that, I'll turn it over to you to talk about Awaken My Love.
Yeah, so I liked Because the Internet when we listened to it back when. I mean, I definitely wasn't something that I was blown away by, but I was listening to it knowing that this album came next. All I'd ever heard from this was Redbone, maybe once in my life. Like, I didn't listen to it because I heard it on the radio. I think by that point I was so checked out I was never hearing like big songs like that unless I went out to hear them. But I definitely did hear this song because it had a lot of hype around it. But other than that, I didn't know anything about how Childish Gambino would pull off this sound because, again, this is like a complete left field, left hook for him. And it still is because the stuff he's put out after I don't think has really been this. At least not like 100%. I didn't hear his new album. I don't know what the fuck was even up with it. I'm still very confused by everything about it, but I never listened to it as well, so maybe that's why. But you know, like after this, he had the huge single with "This Is America" and the huge video for that, and I definitely that song is definitely not in this ballpark at all. At least almost not at all. Yeah, and so this album feels like he is paying a lot of debts to all of his influences, at least in the realm of R&B and funk and soul. It definitely is an album that's wearing its influences on its sleeve, but you know, it's also really, really impressive how well he pulls it off. Like how well you could go into this really thinking that this was all he ever made. I don't mean the album, but I mean the sound. Like, because really this is an excursion into something completely different for him. And coming off of Because the Internet even, I think there was one song on that was kind of like a soul song, if I remember right. But it was not this. And so it's like, it's surprising that you come into this album and it feels like he's been doing this like forever. Like, the album opens with Me and Your Mama, which is just astonishing. Like, and it's just mind-blowing that it's just like, this was just him trying this out in a way. That's all it ended up being, too. And it's wild. Because, like, that song is just insane. Like, it's this super, like, psychedelic and kind of progressive soul song, funk song. It's kind of both. Like with a really extended intro and then it kicks into like some amazing funk guitar. Just these incredible group vocals. It's so like bold and it's so huge. And it just does not sound like somebody who's just kind of like, I'm just going to dip my toes into funk. You know, it sounds like somebody who like has been making it and wants to push it forward. And then you also couple that with like the other radio single, which was Redbone, which is also just stellar. And these two songs alone would make the album worth listening to. Like, because again, it's just so crazy that he pulled them off so well. Redbone also just so great. And these are such memorable tracks. Like, I feel like both of these tracks are like really two of the big important songs of the last decade that came from fucking Donald Glover. It's just, you know, it's kind of weird. Not that he was bad before, but it's just cool to hear an artist completely change their sound for no reason other than they wanted to, and yet it doesn't just sound like them fucking around, you know? And that, I don't think this album sounds like that at all.
Yeah, and personally, so actually taking a step back there before I go into that, I just want to mention this album was incredibly divisive from a critical standpoint. Because personally, I feel like whenever you have such a radical shift in style, there's like always sort of this preconception that you're just trying to emulate something. And I feel like, I mean, obviously, yes, that is true. Like Donald Glover here is trying to emulate a very specific sound, and as you mentioned, pay homage to clearly their influences. But I feel like this transcends that pure emulation. Like Gambino here emulates the sound very well, makes it his own in a lot of situations. Even I feel like in some ways kind of satirizes, that period of time in an interesting way, but all in very cohesively. And as you mentioned, the top listed track on this song and Redbone alone are just incredible pieces of music coming out of this album. And I do feel like there are a couple tracks that hit a little bit of a low point for me personally, but for the most part, most of the tracks on this album I feel like stand up to that caliber. They don't quite reach that peak as Me and Your Mama or Redbone, but cohesively these all kind of form a sound that is very well emulating that period of time, but still creating something that I think is really exceptional.
Yeah, it does depend on the track also. I feel like Have Some Love, for example, that sounds like pure emulation. Very good emulation, but pure emulation. Like even the chorus, you could imagine that coming right out of like a 70s funk band. Um, but other songs aren't, and there are like modern touches as well, to the production and to certain sounds. Like there's actually a decent use of autotune here, which is never really at the forefront except on one track. But for most of it, it's there. There's like those little touches that make this feel like a modern record and make it feel like it's his. And for the record, I don't think that just because something sounds like other things, it means that there's no value in it. I mean, if it's good, it's good. I don't really give a shit. But I agree that he does make it his own. And also, performance-wise is, I think, where he really makes it his own. Because he does a lot of, honestly, kind of strange things vocally here that, do call back to stuff like Parliament. But it's like he does some pretty wild stuff vocally on some tracks, some pretty weird stuff, and that's one place where he really like kind of carves it into his own sound. And for the most part, I really like what he does. I mean, first of all, he is a really, really good singer, which, he was known for being a rapper. And there are definitely rappers who can sing well, but this is yet another place where it literally just feels like a completely different artist. It's just crazy. Like, he's really great at singing, but it's not just that he's like good at it. He's also like really, really performative. Like, Me and Your Mama is the perfect example to me because his vocal performance there is incredible. It's just like flooring. He can bring so much passion and energy to a performance, and also try some weirder stuff like on Zombies, where he kind of is almost doing like a thriller kind of thing, like where he's like singing in a kind of creepy way, and it's really nice. I also like the song topics on some of these songs. For the most part, the album is basically like about him and his son and his kind of failing relationship with his son's mother. That's what most of the album's about. And in the back half of the album, it kind of becomes a narrative a little bit. But in the first half, there are some cool other songs, like there's Boogeyman, which is playing on, like boogieing, which is crazy because I don't think I've heard that word in a modern song in so long. So it's kind of nuts. But what the song is actually about is it's about racism. And there's a really good line that opens the song where he says, with a gun in your hand, I'm the boogeyman, which I thought was very, 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 very good. And also, the song Zombies, which I just mentioned, is like about people like leeching off of your fame and stuff. And in the song, they're like literally being portrayed as zombies. There's a great vocal from another performer on the song that's just really, really nice. That I really like that song too. So topically, it's good. Lyrically, it's pretty solid. And even when the songs do become like personal songs about his son and his relationship with the son's mother, they're also like just really endearing. Culminating in the final track, which is like this inspirational tune about words that he had passed down from his parents that he wants to pass down to his son, which is just really touching and really nice. Yeah, I'll let you go real quick because I want to get to something else.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about this, and maybe this isn't talking to the album directly, but it's just so wild to me the amount of talent that this person has. I mean, they are a comedic writer, they are an actor in a variety of different types and kinds of roles, they are an accomplished rapper, and then to have come out in a producer, and then to have come out with this, which is such a 180 from all of that, and have it still stand so strongly on its own is just, it's honestly incredible. And also, I don't know how Donald Glover ever sleeps. Like, how can they be working on all of this and still be able to, I saw, this is unrelated, but I saw him in concert, and I think he had the flu and he almost didn't come out, but they literally like shot him up like you would do an athlete, like with an IV. And then he came out and he was like literally throwing up on stage and like almost passing out, and was like, after every song would like go back and get another drip and then come back out. Like, that is wild to me. Anyway.
Yeah, that's nuts. That's dedication. Was that before or after this album?
That would have been after, because he performed This Is America.
Oh, yeah, okay. Oh, yeah, well after then. Yeah,
I mean, we're talking about Star Wars character Lando Calrissian here,
Yeah,
like,
not Donald Glover.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Nuts. So a couple criticisms that I have. So one thing is the production of this album is kind of up and down for me. Like, there are things about it that are super, super pristine. And certain songs sound really, really good. But other songs definitely don't sound really, really good. The drums across the album are like really, 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 really crisp, to the point where they make some songs sound a little bit stiff. I would have liked a little bit of reverb on them, maybe. And then there are tracks like Riot that sound so claustrophobic. Like, there's just no space to the sounds. Like, this song is like a really, really bustling like funk song. It's got like tons of instruments. It's really packed. It's really dense, and it's really, really hard to listen into it because it's all so like cluttered, and it's not the only moment where that happens. Because it's weird. On one sense, it sounds like the production on this was like a really big, like, it sounds like it's a really big production, but it doesn't sound like it was handled super, super well all the time. And then I feel like the album flow is a little bit whack to me, because the first half of the album has a really good balance between like the softer songs, the softer cuts, and the more funk cuts, the more fun cuts. And then the back half of the album turns into a lot of like slow jams. And some of them get longer, which is fine. Like, it's okay for an album to mellow out, I guess. It's just, I'm never a huge fan of when albums do that. I much prefer to be getting like a consistent variety throughout. And I feel like this album kind of chills a little bit towards the end. But all of that aside, like, that would be one thing. And there are even problems with the first half. Like, Riot's kind of short, and it just doesn't really fit super well where it's placed. It kind of comes out of nowhere also. There's a couple moments like that where it sounds like this album is almost trying to reach to be like a big conceptual project in some senses. It feels like there's a lot of thought put into it, but it's not really coming together for me. It feels a little bit scattershot, like it's kind of just a bunch of songs. But the biggest moment where I feel this way is California, which comes after Redbone. Um, I don't like the song, first of all, and I've heard a lot about California being like an album ruining track. I've heard about this song a lot, and I finally heard it, and it didn't live up to the hype. I was expecting something like horrendous, and it wasn't. I actually feel like the instrumental to the track is really, really good. It's just he goes overboard vocally here, and I get that he's trying to like make it kind of like a parody of this kind of song in a way, and it's kind of supposed to be goofy, and I get that. And in the first verse or so, like I'm kind of able to get down with the goofy thing he's trying to put across, but the second verse is almost unforgivable. Like it is very, very, very hard to listen to, and it just seems like he's kind of going overboard. But even aside from the song itself, which isn't terrible, I think I've heard people overstate how bad it is a lot. But even that, it is such a weird fit for this record. Like it almost doesn't fit at all. But it might be able to. It's just that like where it's placed. Like you hear Redbone, which is like, you know, just an incredible like all-timer kind of song, and then you get this weird like almost joke track right after it. It's really, really strange, and I don't think it should have been included at all. But even if it was going to be included, I don't know why it was placed there. And honestly, if I had to pick one main flaw with the album, it's really just that song being here at all. That just feels weird.
Yeah, honestly, California feels like something off of Camp, which is kind of odd.
Yeah, so I don't know. It almost, it just doesn't really feel like it came out of the same sessions. You know, it feels like it was like a throwaway track from something else, or I don't know. It's just weird. But aside from that, I think this album is great. I think this album's super good. I think it's got a really, really good track list. It does suffer from the problem of having like two of the best songs of its decade, and then stuff that just doesn't live up to that. But I also don't think that the rest of the material is like worth sleeping on or anything. Just because it's not as good as those two songs is fine. Like it would be hard to anyway. And there is a lot of great material here. So, yeah.
George Clinton is listed as a collaborator on Riot, mainly because of the sample, but there's just one thing to know. Like, clearly there's a lot of time and credit spent to the homage that we talked about from before. So with that, I'm don't think I have anything else to say, so you want to wrap it up?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so I would give this album an 8. I think it's super good. I do recommend it. I mean, it's one of the biggest like R&B, soul, funk records of the last decade. But I guess it's kind of unfair because he kind of had an unfair advantage going in there. Like he's Donald Glover, but also Childish Gambino already had like a huge following to this point anyway. Now, not to say that this album wasn't a risk at all, but I mean, not as much of it as it would have been for like some other artists.
Yeah, but I do want to mention that it's, you know, it might not be as hard of an accomplishment as it may have been in other decades to potentially earn itself that achievement. But you're talking about a decade that had kind of a pop, funk, soul revival. If you think about Bruno Mars, if you think about Daft Punk and many others, especially in the middle of this last decade, this absolutely blows all of that out of the water.
But not this kind of sound, though. Not like the old, like, Funkadelic Parliament, you know, that kind of funk. That was gone on the charts. I didn't think that ever came up. There was, like, a disco revival. There was, you know, and R&B remains, like, a popular genre, but stuff like contemporary R&B and alternative R&B were huge this decade, not like funk. Like, a record of this variety, there wasn't anything else I can think of that was like huge. But I'm not dissing it by saying that. I think it's deserved. I think the album is really good. And yeah, Um, yeah, that's all I have to say.
I give it pretty much right around the same score, right about an 8. I really enjoy this. It hits some really high highs. It has a couple lows, but nothing that I feel like is album ruining. Even California, I think, is fine. I don't think it cohesively fits within the context of the album. And I agree about some of the pacing issues, but other than that, or I guess I shouldn't say pacing. Well, yeah,
Yeah,
pacing.
pacing, yeah.
Yeah. But other than that, like I think it's just a really fun listen. Has some great lyrical quality and content. And as you mentioned, I think Donald Glover's voice is just absolutely incredible here. And he's flexed it before this album and since, but it wasn't until this era of Gambino that he really kind of came into his own in that sense. Because even a lot of the promotion around this album, he was doing a lot of things like the Radio 1 covers and those sorts of things, but kind of all harkening back to those very specific R&B influences. So he was utilizing that vocal range a lot more in this era of Gambino, and it absolutely shines here. So I definitely recommend this.
All right, then we should move on to our final batch of Re-Recc recommendations. I will go first. So as I said at the beginning of the episode, if you caught, we are recommending things that are very closely related to recommendations we have previously given on this podcast. And I will start by recommending the only other studio Neutral Milk Hotel album, On Avery Island. On Avery Island came out in 1996, and it more closely follows, at least compared to In the Airplane Over the Sea, which was the previous thing that I've recommended. I mean, obviously. At least compared to that, it more closely follows the original sound of Neutral Milk Hotel, which was lo-fi. It was very experimental. There were tape recordings. And originally, it was a solo project just for Jeff Mangum, the lead singer. But this album is where I think they started to shape up a more produced sound in comparison and got towards where they ended up on their second album. I think it's very interesting to hear as a sister to Aeroplane, and it helps you think about Aeroplane in slightly different terms. So we will talk about that next time. And you can go next.
So I am going to recommend Inside, the video game. Inside is a puzzle platformer, adventure, atmospheric experience in the same vein as Limbo. And the reason why it's a Re-Recc is because it's also developed by the Limbo studio. So Limbo was, we've talked about before, but a very influential indie game in the kind of Xbox Summer of Arcade era of indie games. And this was the follow-up. It's very similar in its approach and its style, but it tackles kind of a different thematic experience. It's still that same kind of 2.5D/3D puzzle platformer style of game. So we will talk next time about Inside.
All right, and that does it for this week's Re-Recc. I hope you all enjoyed, and thank you so much for watching as always. And I say this every time, we are on CastBox, assuming you are listening on YouTube. CastBox is always linked in the description on our YouTube videos. Using CastBox, you can download our podcast and listen to it on the go. You can listen to it on a mobile app. We are there, and if you're listening on CastBox, we are on YouTube at the YouTube channel Casting404. We stream these live, so you can come and hang out with us in the chat if you would like to. And that's all I have to say. Join us next time for our final Re-Recc, and after that, we will actually be continuing a bit of a series. It'll just be something a little bit different. than we've done before that I think hopefully you all enjoy. And if you don't, then just skip those 3 episodes. I don't know.
Yeah, thank you as always for listening. We enjoy doing the Re-Recc. I think it's fun to have a reason to talk about some of the things that we talked about in the past in a different manner. We're coming up now. We're getting very close to the big one, the big episode. Of course, Dawn, you know what number I'm talking about, but for the chat, I'm talking about number 69. Nice.
Aw, shit. That's the
Nice.
Sex number. I don't know what we're gonna do. We have to do something really special for that podcast, which is nothing, and we won't even mention it ever again. So I hope that
Yeah, actually, we're just going to skip it. We're going to go from 68 to 70.
Yeah, you can
And
just imagine what episode 69 would have been in your
Yeah.
own head, and you can really craft the perfect podcast for you.
Yeah. Well, it'll be after dark and it'll be in the vault, and then you'll have to pay us to get it out of the vault.
Yeah, so get ready to pay up, and I guess we're done here. Is that
Finally, am I right?
true? Anyway, we'll go ahead and wrap it up here. So, those were our thoughts. Those were our recommendations. Get wrecked.